right, let's get this up and running. I have a exciting topic today, something that I really like talking about, which is building a competency-based approach to writing your application. And I think when people hear this, they oftentimes don't know what that means when I say building a competency-based approach. Um, so we're going to break that down today. And for those who don't know me, my name is Joanne Snapp, like Nick introduced. I've been working with UCR for a couple of years now. Been a pre-med advisor for about 15 years. So excited to be with you guys this semester. So first I'm going to start by posing this question. What do you think schools are measuring in an applicant? And I know there aren't a lot of people here today, but if you want to throw something in the chat, or we can just, I can just share some of the things I've heard over the years. What do you think schools are measuring? Or Ashley and Nick, if you want to chime in and say, what do you think you've heard people think schools are measuring? What types of things? And beyond the MCAT and the test scores and the GPA. So beyond that stuff, what do you think they're looking for? Anybody want to toss out an idea?
I could
Well,
maybe suggest just
yeah, what
idea
have
of,
you heard, Nick?
I think one thing is just, well, very basically, do you know what you're getting into outside of academics? Do you know what a doctor does?
Yeah, so being able to demonstrate your knowledge of the profession, so they're measuring whether you know that or you don't know that. And so that's something like kind of like a checkbox, right? Do they know what they're getting themselves into? Yes or no. Kate wrote critical thinking, passion for medicine, and then someone else wrote experiences, well-roundedness, and then compassion, empathy, and hardworking. These are definitely the answers I was hoping you would say, because these are the types of answers that I hear all the time myself when I ask this question. And these are all technically right. But I'm going to show you something today that might push you a little bit further in thinking about what are they looking for and at. So a long time ago, when I used to work as a director of admissions, I went through the holistic review training put on by the AAMC. And in that holistic review training, they were teaching us as admissions people how to screen applications and how to run a holistic application process. And this was the chart that was used way back when, and I believe is still used at many schools. It's the holistic review chart, and we call it the EAM model, the experiences, attributes, and metrics model. And this is the attributes ring is equivalent to what we're going to talk about today as the competencies, which has they've evolved a little bit. But this ring was used, I used to use this ring to train our admissions committee. So I would stand in front of a room of 100 physicians and all the interviewers and the screeners and teach them how to screen applications holistically. I think most people have heard what a holistic review means when they read applications. When you look at that middle ring, that second to middle ring, the attribute ring, I crossed out race and ethnicity because after the law changed last year, schools can't consider race anymore in admissions, but they definitely are still looking for diversity. And that middle ring there are some of the things that they look at when they look at applications. Notice I didn't say they're looking for, I said they're looking at them. And they're looking at these things because they are trying to understand how people who they accept at their school are going to bring some value to them. And when I say value, I mean, how can you help the future? How can you help healthcare in your future? Because I think we can all agree that there are some problems in healthcare, right? We see some health disparities. We still have a lot of inequitable access. There are just a lot of problems right now with certain groups of people not being able to get full access to healthcare while other people can. And so they look at people and they say, okay, what can people do to contribute to solving some of our problems in healthcare? And so when they look at people's applications, they look at a lot of things, right? They're looking at your grades, of course, and your tests, and they're looking at what you've done and your experiences, but they're also looking at you as a person, like who are you and what can you do in order to solve some of these problems? And, this is this actually allows them to accept almost anybody they want for any reason, as long as that person brings value to them as a school, and how they see them bringing value to the health field. So this gives the schools a lot of flexibility and a lot of freedom to be able to accept people from a wide range of metrics and backgrounds and basically whoever they want. And that's how they can pick 6,000, 150 people out of 6,000 applications. So this is how it was done for at least, a good decade. This is the model that was used. And then about, oh, I don't know, about maybe a little under 10 years ago, the schools introduced a different approach to applications. And I still believe holistic review is very much in play and they still use this model. But a few years ago, I think the holistic review started to get challenged by a few people, saying, well, there's not a lot of transparency in terms of who you're picking and why. It's easy to look at people and just pick, random attributes and say, like, oh, we want this, this, and this. So the schools developed with the AAMC, the schools developed these competencies, and competencies are a little bit different than attributes because competencies suggests that you can do things, right? You're good at things. And so a lot of schools are shifting to a competency based approach to admissions, which means that they're measuring certain qualities in people. And they want to know that you're actually good at stuff before you get to a doctoral level or graduate level education, which, to be honest, doesn't seem that bizarre, right? That they would expect you to be good at things before you get to them. And so it used to be 15, now it's 17 core competencies. And I always think it's funny because people are often very perplexed, like, oh, what are medical schools looking for in their applicants? We don't know. Well, it's actually not that complicated. It's really just listed out. This is what they're measuring in their applicants. So it's not a mystery. We don't have to guess. They've told us what they're looking for. And if you Google AAMC core competencies, you'll find a really nice website and even a PDF handout that you can print that has descriptions for all of these that will describe, like, basically what all of these mean. I wanted to kind of go through or highlight a couple of them today because some of them are pretty cool. But is there any competency on here for anybody in the room where you're not really sure what any of this means? Like, are there anything on here you're not sure what it means? No, thank you, Nick, for posting that. If I call on anybody in this room, you're going to be able to tell me what cultural humility means? Everybody knows? Okay, well, great. You guys are just way, thank you for being honest because I was going to say, wow, if everyone here knows what every single one of these means, you guys are certainly the honors students of pre-med or pre-health students because most of the time I find that people don't know what all of these mean. So cultural awareness and cultural humility, these were broken up from cultural competence. And cultural competence, I think, has become a little problematic, or it's always been, but people recognize it's problematic because competence suggests knowing something, right? Just like competencies suggest that you're good at something. And it's really impossible to have cultural competence completely. If you have competence in a certain culture because you've immersed yourself in that culture and you know that really well, that's fantastic. And that means you can provide culturally appropriate care to that community. But you're going to meet so many patients in your career where you're just simply not going to understand their background. And so, um, it's more important that you maintain cultural humility, which is saying, I actually don't know about your background. Can you please teach me? So when you meet someone new, if you're not familiar with their religion, if you're not familiar with where they're coming from, let's say you're not familiar with, if you're not familiar with how poverty in fact impacts healthcare, that you take the time to listen and learn from your patients so that you can be able to adapt your approach to their needs. So humility is more of coming at people with an understanding that you don't know about them and that you're curious and you want to learn so that you can be more appropriate. You don't assume things. If you start assuming things about people, it can get kind of dangerous, right? Is there any other phrase on here that you are not sure how they would measure that? Okay. So, where do all of these competencies show up? Well, the personal statement is the big one. I think that um everybody assumes that your personal statement is the most important part of your application, and I do agree it is. But there are so many other parts where when they read this entire 30-page PDF in, less than 10 minutes, they're going to try to get as much information from all the parts as possible to put together one big picture of who you are as a person. That biographic information section in the beginning gives them a lot of background information. So that's where your impactful experience description is. That's where you have your parents' information in terms of what your parents do for a living, your household income growing up, whether you had to work as a young person and contribute to the family. Just so many, it tells them whether you're a first generation college student. So there's already so much info they get about you in that bio section. But moving past that, your impactful experience description, which we're going to talk about today, your experience writing, your letters of rec, you want your writers to be talking about your competencies, and then your secondaries. So when I say take a competency based approach to your application, all I mean is that as you're writing each piece of the application in this, that you are keeping in mind what it is that they're actually measuring in you. So you could randomly, write things, and you can just think of random stories that you think are great stories. But if you're not thinking about what it is that they're measuring in you, you could be writing about all kinds of, random stuff, but not intentionally managing what they learn about you. And so a competency-based approach application is simply just being intentional with the stories that you tell and knowing what you're doing as you're writing your application. That nothing is random, right? You've really thought through, like, I want them to understand this, this, and this about me. And you've intentionally selected those stories and paired them together to get that understanding about you. And so this is a little bit different of approach when we talk about personal statements. And this might go against some mainstream advice about personal statements that's out there. So I understand that, or I acknowledge this might contradict some other advice that you might get about this. But I'm going to share a different approach to writing a personal statement that's a little bit more competencies. So historically, why medicine has always, has been answered with more of like a journey story. So you start with this thing inspired this thing, sparked my interest in medicine. And I did this, and I did this, and I did this. And each thing that I did reaffirmed my desire. So you basically show how each step along the way made you want to be a doctor more and more. And sometimes themes like helping people and loving science and seeing a good or a bad doctor come out in those stories. But it's really just saying over and over and over that you want to be a doctor. And here's the thing, in all of my years that I've been in admissions and listened to admissions people talk, it's rare that they actually doubt that you want to be a doctor. Most people don't take OChem or take the MCAT or pay $3,000 accidentally, not sure that they want to be a doctor. Most people do actually want to be doctors when they apply to medical school. So if they already assume that you want to be a doctor and all you're doing in your personal statement is telling them that you want to be a doctor, they have learned nothing new about you. There's nothing they can measure in the fact that you want to be a doctor. So if you look back at those competencies and they're like, okay, what am I supposed to learn about this person from the fact that they want to be a doctor? There's nothing there, right? And so instead, if you think about answering the question, what is the value that you bring to medicine? It's kind of like, okay, I'm going to apply to a doctoral level education, and I have some idea about why I want to do that. Like, what is it I'm getting this degree for? Why do I want to wake up every day for the rest of my life and practice medicine? What do I hope to do in my future? What problems do I hope to solve? And more importantly, what have I done in my past that would equip me to do that well? So if you ask somebody why they wanted to do their job, it's usually because they want to do something in the future, right? They want to solve some problem. It's not that they have a whole story about how they arrived at the decision to apply for that job. So, and for some reason in medicine, a lot of people don't think like that. They don't think forward facing, they think backwards. So, I'm going to encourage you to kind of shift a little bit and think forward. Why is it that you want to be a physician? Why do you want to go to medical school? What are these things that you want to do in your future? And so, the structure is, of a competency based approach is not different than any other application. You would start with a story that opens with some moment in time. And I always encourage people to start with a moment in time in your own, like from your from your background. I love when people share a little bit about their background in their intro, gives them some context for who you are. But that thesis, that last sentence of your intro really should be a statement of why it is you want to be whatever it is, a doctor, dentist, PA. And it could sound something like, as a physician, I want to increase access to medicine for marginalized communities by providing culturally and linguistically appropriate care. It could sound like, as a physician, I want to contribute to the generation of new knowledge through clinical research and blah, 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 blah. So, whatever it is you want to do, you kind of show that. But your intro has to lead into that. It has to be a story that kind of gives us an understanding of how you got to that particular goal. And then every story you tell is not just a story that shows, again, that you want to be a doctor. It's a story that shows you doing something like your thesis. So if you say, I want to be a physician who increases access by providing culturally appropriate care, then one paragraph could be about a time where were doing health education with an underserved community, and you adapted your recommendations to that community. You recommend the recommendations for food to be more appropriate to their culture. So you're showing how you adapted, your health education to a culture. And then in your takeaway, your paragraph would be something like, as a physician, I want to continue taking the time to learn about my community so that I can make appropriate recommendations to help improve health outcomes. So it's very, very specific in terms of what it is that you want to do. And that shows them why it is you want to be a doctor. It shows them that you have an idea of what you're going to do. And so you tell 2 or 3 stories, and the stories can be about anything. It doesn't always have to be about healthcare. It can be about tutoring. Sometimes people tutor and they help make complicated concepts accessible to people, which really shows your ability to break down, hard like science concepts, which is very applicable to medicine. You could be an RA and having to deal with a crisis with a resident. You could be doing almost anything. It doesn't even matter. It's more that you're showing them that you have some skills that you want to bring to the table, and hopefully the skills relate back to your thesis. So one activity I always used to do with my college students is I would say, I want you to imagine that you've been a fry cook at McDonald's, and I want you to convince me that being a fry cook at McDonald's has made you valuable for medicine. And if you start to break down the tasks of a fry cook at McDonald's, you'll see there are a lot of transferable skills, a lot of applicable skills that you can easily parallel with medicine. And so you can make any experience relevant if you know what it is you're trying to show them. So you kind of want to think about, what is it I want to do, and then how do I want to show them that I have this insight and this perspective that I can bring to the table. And then you come up with stories that show them that. And then in your conclusion, you start by pulling your opening story back down. You kind of restate your thesis in different words, and you kind of summarize the points that you just made in your body paragraphs. And then you just end by saying, kind of answering the question, where do you see yourself in 15 years? You think about where, yeah, that question is a really common interview question. Where do you see yourself in 10 or 15 years? Go ahead and try to answer it in your paragraph, in your conclusion. You don't have to name your specialty. You probably should not name your specialty that you're interested in if you have one. But if you have an idea like, I want to go into academic medicine, or I want to go into community medicine, or I want to do research, I want to do global health, those are big topics that you probably do have some idea about at this point in your life. And so those types of things are perfectly okay to share in your conclusion. So our goals are, we are trying to reveal competencies. And so what you could do is look at the competency list, and then you can think of stories that, or experiences that align with some of those competencies, and then think of stories that you've done that will highlight the things that you're good at. So for example, if you've ever worked in a community different from yourself, and you took the time to learn about someone, asked questions, kept an open mind, then you would tell a story about how you did that, and then talk about why cultural humility is important to you and how you plan on doing that in the future. So we're always tying it to your future as a student or doctor. And whenever we can, we really want to share glimpses into your background. So if you have a background you want to share, like kind of like a disadvantage, you could write your impactful experience description, which will give them a big context for your background. But there could be other little things about you that you want to share, and we try to work that in wherever we can in your personal statement. And then I know you've all been told you want to show, don't tell, but I'm a big fan of show and tell. So you show through your stories and then you tell them in your reflection. If you don't tell them why you're telling them the story, they may not understand what the point of reading the story is. So make sure you're translating the story's takeaway for them. Tell them why it's relevant. So I wanted to show you some examples so you can really see what I mean by a competency based approach. So I'm going to give you just a couple minutes and I want you to read this paragraph and then we're going to talk about what are the competencies that you see here. Okay, this is actually an intro to a personal statement. And 8 is the number of interviews that she got. So, what do you learn about this person without this person ever declaring anything about themselves? But what do you learn about this person from the story? Does anybody want to share? Definitely empathetic, right? She says, I recognized her fear and mistrust immediately. She has the social skills. So we call that emotional intelligence. So she can read people without any words, right? And once she recognized that this person was uncomfortable, what did she do? She adapted, right? So adapting, she kind of pivoted. She said, "Okay, well, we're not going to talk about that. Let's talk about something else." But she didn't have an agenda. She didn't say like, "Oh, I need this person to see the doctor." So she didn't just push and say like, "Well, let's we need you to see her." So she was able to adapt her approach to this person, and then yeah, she was very cognizant of how Pam probably felt, some of the fear and mistrust, which is a form of cultural awareness because I'm sure the community that Pam comes from has probably some cultural norms or some behaviors that she might have been used to, and so she was able to be aware of that, and then she adapted her approach to those norms. And so there's a lot of things that you pick up about this person in terms of competencies that she never has to say about herself. She does not have to announce them, right? So when people say show, don't tell, that's what that means. It's show them the competencies. Don't tell them that you're good at things. But then at the end, you do want to tell them why it is you want to do, why you want to do whatever you want to do. So her thesis statement is, as a physician, I hope to practice humanistic medicine while attempting to rebuild trust in vulnerable communities. That's what she wants to do. That's why she wants to be a doctor. Does that make sense? Let's do one more real quick. All right. What do you notice about this person? They're definitely an advocate, right? They recognize there's some injustice here, there's some issue. The patients feel torn. They don't want to come in because they feel, unsafe being older and during COVID. And what does this person do? Yep, so they have some integrity, and they have an ethical responsibility to others. Do you remember that competency? If you pull that competency sheet up, you'll see that was one of the competencies is an they basically ethical responsibility to others. And so um yeah, they adapted again, they changed. So it's again like this ability to recognize a problem and being able to figure out what to do. So it's showing some level of emotional intelligence. It's showing, I would say, just some confidence in themselves to be able to make that decision. And then again, they're very clear about what it is they want to do. As a physician, I will strive not to do to I'll strive to, what does it say here? Not only put my patients first, but do my best to ensure they feel that their concerns are my highest priority. That's what they want to do as a physician. So that's their goal. That's why they want to do this. So this is a little bit different, right? Like most of the personal statements you might have read online or seen samples, a lot of times people will just end their paragraph by saying, doing this reaffirmed my desire or fueled my passion or some other phrase like that. Um, but I'm pushing you to maybe think about, instead of saying just that it wants you want to be a doctor, to really think about um how it is that you want to be a doctor. We're not going to go through this all like in depth, but I just want you to look at this last sentence again. Sorry, my mouse is messed up. It says so it's a story about another clinical research coordinator and someone who sits down with a patient, and at the end they say, these experiences have inspired me to continue research as a physician to advance medicine by building disease knowledge that is reflective of the patient population with whom I work. So, this is all it took. This person ended up with 9 interviews, writing a personal statement like this that just reflects on how it is that they want to practice medicine in their future. I forgot this person. Oh, this person had 14 interviews. So, this is the approach I've been using for many, many years. And I have a lot of evidence that this works with lots of people who've been successful. And so I want to share this with you all today because it's an alternative approach. You don't have to use this approach. There's lots of ways to writing a personal statement. But because we know that the med schools are actually measuring competencies in you, it might be in your best interest to try to highlight competencies in your application. So I'll just leave it at that. Here's a little practice you can do if you're working on your personal statement. As you write your paragraphs, you can think about what it is that you hope your reader will learn about you next to every paragraph. So, for example, if you're intending for them to learn cultural humility and let's say something else, and you write that there, let someone read your personal statement and then ask them give them the list and say, what competencies did you learn about me from this? And have them write down, in another doc, have them note what competencies they learned and does it match your expectations. So if they're writing something way off than what you expected, then you know that you have to go back and do your writing better. You have to make sure your writing is showing very clearly what you want them to learn. You have to be careful though, because if you let a lot of people read your personal statement, they might have a different idea of what a personal statement should look like because there are so many different versions out there. And if you give it to someone and they start telling you, "Oh, this is not right. You shouldn't be writing it like this. You have to write one long story or you have to do this or that." That's not exactly what you're asking here from somebody. You want to make sure you're what you are asking them to do is clear. Say, "I don't need help writing my personal statement. I just need you to tell me what you learn about me from this." And I'm just, you're just trying to collect that data so that you know if you've written your competencies well. All right. So the next big piece where you can include your competencies is the impactful experience description. And this is a 1325 character little block of writing that is in the biographic information section. This is a self-identified box that is optional. You don't have to write this. You can, I would say about half the people write the impactful experience. And it's not the same thing as like being underserved or being underrepresented. A lot of times there's a box actually for whether you're underserved or not in the application. This is a different thing. The impactful experience section replaced the disadvantage statement, but a lot of schools are still using that space in the same way. So they want to know, what have you experienced in your life that has impacted you? So here are some examples of topics that people have written about for that section. And of course, you can write about other things, but I would caution you that a lot of people who use this section do write about disadvantages. And so if you write about something else like, a clinical experience or something else like that, it's going to feel really out of place amongst the other people who write things like this. So I would really encourage you not to just use it for anything. I would really use it for a more impactful life experience, something that happened to you, maybe before college or, something big during college. And it's very matter of fact piece of writing, but through the writing, they're still going to be able to pull certain things about you. They can make some assumptions about you. And so I have an example here. I'm not saying this is like the best written one ever. It's just an example. And so I'll just give you a minute or two to read this really quick. Okay. Are there any competencies that you might assume about this person? Are you anything? It doesn't necessarily have to come from that list, but what do you understand about this person from this story? Definitely resilient, right? They're persistent and resilient. They've gone through a lot. They've gone to school in a school that didn't necessarily prepare them. We can assume that, right? If they're in the bottom 10%. So if they went to college and let's say they had some rocky first year grades, we can understand why that might be. You don't have to literally talk about your bad grades. You can just help them understand why that is, why that might be the case. Um, Working, supporting your family, all of that's good stuff to highlight because again, it shows that um, you have a really strong work ethic and you're part of a community. You give back to other people. Um, yeah, there's a lot about this person that you can probably assume, and it's probably mostly correct. But this type of statement gives them a lot of context for who you are, and it helps them just start to put some pieces together about you. So then when you get to your personal statement, you don't have to talk about any of this stuff again. You can jump right into your stories. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next big part of your app where you're going to show a lot of competencies. And I'm going to talk to you about your Mary Poppins bag. If you have never watched the movie Mary Poppins, is a good time to do it. It's about a nanny who is a magical nanny, and she carries that big handbag with her, and she goes to a family's home who's having some trouble. And whenever she goes to a home, she opens up her handbag and lots of stuff comes out of her bag magically, some ridiculous stuff. And she uses this stuff everywhere she goes to help her with whatever situation she's in. So I want you to imagine as you go into your next phase of education, medical school or dental school or wherever, you have this bag with you, right? You're going to carry this magical bag with you as you go into your future. And the things that are going to go into that bag are going to help you in your future, help you with different things. And so your experiences, each experience that you write is going to produce something that goes into that bag. It's going to produce a takeaway, a lesson learned, some insight, a perspective. And we're going to write personal statement or experience descriptions that show them what it is that you're putting in your bag and carrying with you to your future. So I call that a takeaway. So if you're just starting your application prep, you're going to just basically start a doc number 1 through 15, and you're going to start listing every single thing you've done since graduating high school, including all the jobs that you think might not be relevant. So if you ever worked at McDonald's, you're going to put McDonald's on there because, like I said, you can find something from that job that has helped you in your future. Everything you've done, especially customer service jobs, have helped you in your will help you in your future. So you are going to put a hobby, you're going to put your dean's list, you're going to put if you went to a conference. Every single thing you've ever done goes into your experience descriptions. And your job is to figure out how to write that description in a way that shows them something that you bring with you into the future. So you're going to start with a couple of sentences. What did you do? Big picture. So you're going to like, let's say you were a scribe. I don't need to know what a scribe is, but I need to know like what was the context of your scribing job. So you might say, I scribed for 3 physicians in a private practice in suburban, a suburban affluent neighborhood. Or I scribed in a federally qualified health clinic in an urban underserved neighborhood. So it gives me some idea about what it is that you saw at this job. And then you're going to kind of jump into what did you do? So your takeaway in those middle sentences, you want to start to lead into your takeaway. Let's say for your scribing position, you want to talk about being able to let's say you focus on having to learn a lot of really new information. Like, let's say you were scribing for an ophthalmologist and you didn't know anything about ophthalmology before you started. So your 2 sentences in the middle would be, having never stepped foot in an ophthalmologist's office before, I knew nothing about the terminology or the procedures of ophthalmology. I spent hours after work researching, reading articles, asking a lot of questions. And then you're leading to a takeaway, which is having done this experience really built my self-directed learning skills and my ability to find information quickly through research articles and blah, blah, blah. So the takeaway is that you're really good, you're good at finding information and you're good at being a self-directed learner. You could have went in probably 20 different directions with that. You could have talked about, seeing the patient doctor dynamic. You could have talked about working in a fast-paced environment. You could have talked about multitasking, so many things. You choose the takeaway. You get to choose where your experience description goes. And when you look at all of your experiences together, you should have different takeaways. They should be learning 15 different things about you that you're good at. So after you've pointed out that you're a really good self-directed learner with scribing, maybe in your next one you talk about being in a club and being the president of that club, and you focus on, growing from being really nervous about public speaking to being able to stand in front of a room of 100 and inspire everybody. So now I learned, okay, you're really good at self-directed learning. You're also really good at public speaking. And next one, you choose, right? You get to decide what they learn about you. So that's what I mean by a competency-based approach is you're intentionally deciding what the med schools are learning about you. You're not just writing things and hoping that they get something out of it. And if you're writing your descriptions and most of your writing about your description is about the actual experience and not about you and what you did and what you took away, they're going to go, okay, cool. Well, now I know a lot about this organization, but I don't know anything about this person. So make sure that your writing is centered on what you did and what you learned, because you're the one who's trying to get in. And your takeaway should not be this reaffirm my desire to be a whatever. This should really be something unique and specific to the experience. Does anybody have any questions about this? Thank you. Okay. In AMCAS only, you're going to have 3 additional boxes that are called meaningful experiences. And now I'm finding people are confusing the impactful experience with the meaningful experience. There are 2 different things. So your meaningful experiences, you have an additional 1325 characters in a different box. So this is not one big chunk of writing, but 2 chunks of writing, one 700 character box and one 1325 box. And you get to write 3 more paragraphs about your experiences. So you're going to pick 3 of your experiences and you're going to answer the question, what was the transformative nature of this experience? And the transformation is within you, not how did you transform somebody else, but how did you grow or change from that experience? And so if you think about this, in your 3 boxes of your meaningfuls, you get to highlight 3 more things that you're really good at. So, and you want to show how you chose or how you changed or how you grew from that experience. So let's say that you had a leadership experience, and on your first day of that leadership experience, you were really not confident as a leader. You really struggled to get your team on board. You had some morale issues or some conflict, and you either sought help, read something, learned something somehow. Maybe, over time you had a lot of trial and error, but basically you end by talking about how you were able to grow as a leader from that experience. And you kind of have show something how you grew. And so the takeaway is, maybe having struggled initially, but sought feedback from my mentor and tried different leadership approaches. I was able to get my team on board, and we accomplished this task, teaching me how important it is, as a leader, to continue growing and seeking feedback from my team and others, so that I can make sure I'm serving my team or serving as a or maybe we want to talk about servant leadership, continuing as a servant leader, as a physician, or something like that. So you're making sure that the ending is very clear, that this is about you wanting to continue growing as a leader. So you have your paragraphs from your personal statement that are going to show 3 or 4 different things about you. And then you have these 3 paragraphs. You don't want these 3 paragraphs to highlight the same things that your personal statement paragraph did. So you have to be intentional again about choosing what you're talking about. Your meaningful descriptions can be from the same experiences as your personal statement. That's really common, but you need to talk about them in different ways. So your personal statement meaningful is really leading into how you want to practice medicine. Your meaningful descriptions are talking about how this experience changed you. So you're not talking about medicine in that. You're talking about you. But you again have the chance to highlight different things about you. So lots and lots of space to highlight what you're really good at. Um, so we can do the same type of activity that we did with your personal statement. We can write out all of your experiences and write down what you think you want them to learn, and then give them to someone else and see if they name the same things. If they do, cool, you did a good job. Okay, now one of the other places you're going to see where you can highlight your competencies is through your letters of recommendation. And letters of rec are a little tricky, right? Because you can't always control what people put in your letters of rec. But what you can do is when you ask for the letter of rec, you can try to give them some guidance in terms of what it is you hope they can say. And you can do that with your cover letter. You can actually give them some ideas about what you hope they would comment on. So you could say something like, having worked with you, for 3 years in the lab, you've been able to witness my ability to grow as a researcher and on a team as a team player, having worked with multiple, research assistants and grad assistants. And I was hoping you'd be able to comment on my ability to, communicate well in a team and da 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 da. So you kind of suggest to them, like, I really hope you'd be able to comment on this or this if if it's true that they have witnessed those things. Now you can't say, I've went through a lot in my life and I really hope you can comment on my persistence. Well, if they didn't witness your persistence, if that's not what they saw you do, you can't ask them to say things that are not relevant to your position with them. So you have to think about what it is that you did with them and then think about how they can highlight things like that. One, common thing I hear is, I'm asking for a physician or a faculty letter, and I was in a class of 500 people, and this person doesn't know me very well. So how can I get them to write me a good letter? So you think about your experience in their class. Maybe you struggled with the content, and so you went to office hours, or you went to your lab and you talked to your TA a lot, or maybe you stayed after class and asked questions or sat in the front row. Whatever you did, you are going to have to tell them that experience, and you're going to have to let them know what that means about you. So, you know, at the beginning of the quarter, I really struggled with your class, to be honest. I love the content, but some of the concepts, such as this and this, were really hard for me. So I stayed after class every day and asked you questions. I sat in the front row and I spent a lot of time with your TA Ashley trying to understand this. And even though I didn't get an A in your class, I really left your class having grown a lot as a learner. And I really appreciate the time you spent, helping me grow that way or something like that. So you share with them your experience in the class so that they have something to work with. So then that person can talk about your science competency and your willingness to learn and your curiosity and all of that. Does that make sense to everybody? Cool. Okay. These are just some random facts about letters of rec. If anybody has any questions about letters, or actually anything, I think I'm going to stop there. This is a little bit more technical that we're going to go through at a later time when we talk about applications. So I'm going to stop there and kind of open the floor to see if anybody has any questions about anything that I shared today. Is a committee letter better than an individual letter? No. So it is the case that most California schools don't have committee letters, and there's nothing to worry about there. You don't have to feel bad or worried about that. Um, your individual letters in some ways are better for you, and here's why. So when you put all of your letters in AMCAS, you can divvy out which letters go to which schools. You get to decide. So let's say you get 5 letters. You don't have to send all 5 letters to every school. You could send, if one of them you're worried about, you can send that letter to only certain schools and kind of mix it up, right? Mix the combination up. Whereas if you have a committee letter, every letter you put in the committee goes to every single school. You don't get to control that. So that's kind of nice for you guys if you have an individual letter that you get to manage that a little bit. But I've been working with California applicants. This will be my 10th year working with California applicants, and I have not found that it has held them back at all. You just have to explain that your school doesn't have one. That's a great question. Does anybody else have any other questions about anything? If they ask us to write our own draft of a letter, how do we go about writing in that draft? How strong can it sound natural? So if they ask you to write your own letter, you really need to work with them. There is a letter writer guide on the website. You can Google AAMC letter writer guide, and it kind of gives you an idea of how to write letters. I really encourage you to work with them. So if you draft something out, make sure you're sharing it with them and asking them for their feedback on that letter. Um, because you need it to sound like them, and it is hard sometimes to sound like the person. If you know them really well, that might be easier. But basically, they just want you to like create that first draft that helps them out a little bit. So ultimately, you're going to give it over to them, and they should be able to fix it up for you. But you want to think about again, like how have they observed you? It has to be from their perspective, not what you think about yourself. So the strong part should come from what they've observed you do. And of course you want a strong letter. Everybody, you wouldn't want to not have a strong letter. So there's nothing wrong with making your letter, any of it. You want all your letters to be strong. Any other questions? Um, for the activities sections, if I would like to write an entry on publications, would you just put the citations and the experience descriptions, or would you go into more detail? So it depends on how many publications you have. If you just have like one or two, you can usually just put the citations, but I still want you to write a reflective like sentence or two about the publication process. If you have several publications, I probably wouldn't just list all your citations. I think that it's kind of jarring for a reader just to see a bunch of citations and not know any context for what they're reading. So I would rather you say, from the 3 years I worked in the lab, it resulted in 10 publications in journals such as this or this, and then reflect on what the research or the publication process was like for you. So, were you writing a lot of the manuscripts, or were you only contributing data? There's a big difference in being an author on a paper. Some people don't ever do any writing; they contributed the data, and that's all they did. Some people literally wrote like the methods section, which is a really complicated process. So I would give them some idea about what your role was, and especially if you were the one making the revisions post review, that's a really like you can learn a lot from that process. It usually humbles people quite a bit. So I would give them some idea about how in depth that was for you. Same thing with like if you put your dean's list, if you're on the dean's list, you can either just put like, oh, I got a To get on the dean's list at UCR, we had to have a X number GPA for X number of units. But if you have space, you can actually reflect on maybe what that meant to you. So, for example, if you had a quarter that was like if you started out a little rough, first couple of years, you can talk about how finally getting on the dean's list meant so much to you after a little bit of a struggle. If you never really struggled and you were on the dean's list for 4 years, I don't know what you would possibly say. I'm just naturally brilliant. I don't know what you say. So maybe you don't want to reflect on that. But if you are anyone who's normal and you struggle a little bit in college, which is very typical, it's okay to talk about that struggle there, but just talk about like how being on the dean's list was very redemptive for you. If we send in the application on May 29th, is that going to negatively impact our chances? I'm asking since this April MCAT scores will be out May 29th. Okay, so let's talk about that for a second. Um, if you submit on May 29th and you don't know your scores, which you should know them on May 29th, sounds like, then you can submit your app with just one school on your list and just hit submit with one school just to start the verification process. And then once you get your MCAT scores back, then you can assess what you want to do moving forward, whether that be continue and add school, whatever schools are appropriate for your MCAT score. If it's like not in a good shape and you don't feel like you're comfortable applying with what score you got at that point, you could either plan to retake it in later summer or you can bail on this cycle. And if you do, then you only applied to one school, so you didn't waste so much money. I think, if you're only days away, like for example, in this case, I don't think I would submit until I see my scores. There's no reason, I mean, applying on day one doesn't give you a huge advantage. You could apply within the first week or 2, and you're like literally the same boat that the first day is. So I don't know that I would really risk wasting money if you don't know what your MCAT score is if you're just a few days away. But if you're like not getting your MCAT score until June or July, I would just submit with one school, not put all your schools in there. Good questions. Anybody else have any other questions? All right then. Well, Nick and Ashley, thank you so much for having me again. I will be back next time. I think we're going to do lots of stuff. We're going to talk about creating school lists and how to fill out AMCAS and how to write secondary. So check out the HPAC website and you'll see all of the workshops that are coming down the line. You're very, very welcome. Have a great day, everybody.